Working Cows Podcast, Episode 12.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
This episode of the Working Cows Podcast is brought to you by Kamak Ranch Supply. Check out their website at kamakranchsupply.com. They understand the needs of ranchers and farmers, whether you need to take care of your livestock, horses, or even building supplies. They have everything you need to work your cows, whether that be the chute you work them through, the water you bring them to, or the tools you use to make them go up that chute a little bit faster. So check out their website at kamakranchsupply.com. This episode is also brought to you by chriswilliamsaudio.com. If you're a musician, podcaster, or filmmaker, making your product sound great is crucial. Don't settle for audio that's less than professional. No matter what type of audio service you need, Chris Williams and his team have got you covered. Head on over to chriswilliamsaudio.com for all your audio production needs. Welcome back, everybody. On this week's episode, we have Curt Pate joining us. Curt Pate has been conducting demonstrations and clinics on stockmanship, colt starting, horsemanship, and safety. His abilities conducting both horsemanship and stockmanship demonstrations, along with his ability as an effective communicator, have made him a sought-after clinician, so I know we're going to have a great conversation with Curt Pate regarding stockmanship. Curt, thank you for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast. I appreciate you taking the time to be with me today. I'd like to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself just a little bit and kind of tell us about what you're doing and how you came to do what you do now.
I appreciate you having me on, and I'm kind of jealous you're in one of my favorite parts of the world in Bellevue, South Dakota. So I miss that place. I don't know what I'm really doing or how I got here, but I just spent the week in Mexico last week, and they all thought I should be a veterinarian there, because I guess all their cattle handlers are veterinarians. But I was thinking about that, and my only passion in this whole world all my life has been, well, job-wise, has been training animals or working with animals, whether it be horses or cattle, or I'm going to do a sheep clinic right now. And so many years ago, I set a goal that I want to be the best horseman and cattleman I can be. And I believe that goal kind of took me to where I am now. And so I think when you set a goal like that, sometimes you have to teach or break things down that makes you get to a level that it's even higher than you can get by doing something. So teaching makes you better. So I don't really want to be a teacher, but I think it makes me a lot better. And my real passion is getting along with animals and producing animals for food or performance in a positive way that's good for the world.
Yeah, very good. So what are some of the things that we can do to help produce animals in a positive way? What are some of the positive things that can be done to help produce them?
Well, the first thing we got to realize is what we're doing. And I believe grazing animals are really meant in this world. I used to say horses or cattle were made for making good steaks and good horses. But as I kind of started to get a little better knowledge, I understand that grazing animals are so much needed for our environment. And that means they transfer nutrients from cellulite to the ground, and that keeps the cycle going. So that's our grazing animal's job. And our job as stockmen is to create the situation that they make that cycle happen as good as they can. As soon as we put fences in this world, we change the whole dynamics of things, and that's when stockmen became important. On the other side, in our confined feeding world, we have so much abundance of food that we can't eat, humans can't eat. We have to do something with that. And so our animals can convert that into protein that's useful for humans through our use of animals. And so both those things create stockmen that can get the best gain for the animals. It's a good quality of life for the animals, for the people, and the product that the consumer wants. And that's ever changing right now.
Sure. Yeah, that changing demand is a challenging thing. What are some of the things that we can do in the way we handle cows and sheep and livestock in general to meet those changing demands?
Well, first thing I do is study what my grandfather did. I think all last week in Mexico, when I was doing some work in some feed yards down there, I said, I want to be a better stockman than my father and as good as my grandfather. And I think our world has changed so much that when grandfather was doing things and grandmother, they had smaller numbers. They had less production goals, but they had to read animals real well because they didn't have all the science that we have or the good facilities that we have. So they were probably better stockmen because of the less animals and all those things. So I'm really trying to figure out ways to, in our modern world, where we have lots of animals, we have lots of challenges, we have lots of stress on our animals because of the numbers and the speed that we have to do things, we have to really figure out how to be extremely good at what we do to get this process done.
Sure. What do you think makes a good stockman?
To me, a good stockman is somebody that can read when an animal is in growth mode, whether you're a horseman, that's in thinking his way out of pressure, or when you're a stockman, the animal is in growth mode where he's wanting to go eat something or lay down or chew his cud or do something. And understanding when an animal is changing from thinking or growth to survival or what I call shrink. And there's a real fine line there when you're dealing with animals that you got to put enough pressure on them to keep them working and going, but not go over the line and create that stress that is negative for performance. The other thing that I think makes a good stockman is being able to see when an animal is going to get sick before it actually gets sick. That means you really are in tune with your animals. You know what makes a healthy animal, and you'll take the time and have the awareness to see when something is changing, and you'll start looking to see what's happening to that animal.
Sure. So when you talk about, you said shrink mode?
Yeah, you bet.
Is that similar to kind of the fight or flight type of a instinct?
Absolutely. Yep. And actually the fight or flight thing, actually sometimes an animal kind of go into a little bit of flight, that actually will improve gains, improve production. But if it goes too far, if we do it too much and too long, then it's stress that's negative. And then my grandfather used to always say, we either have an animal on the gain or on the shrink. And so we always try to keep them in the gain mode.
Sure. I'd like to circle around a little bit back to that be as good as my grandfather piece. They ran smaller numbers, but most of their demand was being met locally, right? I mean, most of the demand for the cows that they were raising was staying local. Is that accurate to how you understand that history?
Somewhat, and they didn't always run smaller numbers either, Clay. I've read lots of books about South Dakota when they used to ship trainloads of cattle from the south when they had rain, when things were good on the reservations or wherever, lots and thousands of cattle. And we had lots of good stockmen out there taking care of those cattle and getting them shipped back out. So, the markets have always been, so they were shipping cattle from Texas or Kansas or somewhere to South Dakota, and then they'd load them up and ship them out again. So we had both. I think we had a real local trade, and we had a real foreign trade as well. So it's always been that way. We just have to learn to read what our markets want and the best way to produce those cattle. I know a lot of cattle in those times. They used to call aged beef 3 or 4 year old cattle. That's the term aged beef used to be. So the cattle were a lot bigger, a lot older. And I'll tell you what, if you handle those cattle right when they're young, when they're 3 and 4 years old, they load on those trains. They handle well. If you handle them wrong the whole time, you're going to have a lot of trouble getting them across rivers, getting them in goat pens or whatever. So the stockmanship then was just as important as it is now, or maybe more so because they didn't have the great facilities that we do.
Sure. How much of successful stockmanship do you think depends on the facility itself?
I actually think good facilities have created worse stockmen. It used to be in the days of old, and I'll just talk about the Belle Fourche part of the world, when they had a lot of old wooden set of corrals and pens that weren't very strong, you handle cattle pretty easy. Now we have metal, we have steel, we have all these things. And it used to be when the board started creaking, you back the pressure off. And so the facilities took pressure off the cattle because they weren't strong enough. Now we got all this metal and cable and steel, and the animals, they never get the pressure taken off because we don't have to worry about our facilities. And good hands read that. People that have no feel or really no care or don't understand, they don't read that, and they keep the pressure on.
Sure. We've been kind of on this same line of reasoning here. I'd like to dive a little bit more deep into that idea of growth mode. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yep. So I worked on a ranch, Sieben Ranch Company, and they were a big sheep outfit and a cow outfit. And I was running the cow side of the deal. We were building the cow herd, and we had like 8 bands of sheep. And that's a lot of sheep. And the camp turned to the boss that I was working with, was an excellent stockman. I learned so much from that guy. His name was Clark Atkinson. And he told me one day, he said, a good sheep herder keeps their sheep's head down. That was it. A good sheep herder keeps his sheep's head down. And that's a pretty good, easy way to look at it. That fall, we went and we were weighing lambs, and it was quite a ways away, and we drove over there and helped them. I helped them, and they had to sort the ewes and the lambs off, and then they'd weigh the lambs and put them on a truck. And he told me, he said, you watch. If the herder's fat, if his horse is fat, and his dogs are fat, his lambs will be fat. And that is, so always doing more doesn't necessarily mean that we are doing the best. So to me, an animal has to be content. I don't think cattle or horses, I don't know if they might not. I don't know if they understand happy but I know content. When I see an old cow laying there chewing her cud right beside her calf, full, ruminating, she's content, and I think she's on the game. My family's been in the buck and bull business, and I watch those real flighty cows. They don't gain. They never get fat because they're always looking for something that's maybe going to get them. Where an old Hereford cow or Holstein cow, they don't even worry about something get them, so they're always eating and content. But the more flighty animals, they are always looking around. So we really got to be careful to provide those animals with what they need so they can get comfortable and get the nutrition they need.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. That's a good rule of thumb. If keep their heads down, a good stockman keeps their heads down. Keep them content. I appreciate that. We talked about the facilities design. We do want to improve the facility design, I'm assuming.
Absolutely. So, there's a lot of, I remember the first shoot that I ever remember. My grandfather was a horse trader and a cow trader in Helena, Montana. And he had an old chute that it was wooden. It had 4 posts. It was handmade wood. And the squeeze, there's a big pole up on one side, and you pulled this rope, and there was a stake on the ground, and you tied off to the stake, and that was your squeeze. And I remember I was pretty small, 3 or 4 years old, and I was with him. I was always with my grandfather, and he put a big old stud horse in there, and he was going to cut him standing up in that chute. And that stud horse completely kicked that chute apart. I ended up in the feed bunk looking out, trying to save my life, and my grandpa was madder than heck, but that horse completely kicked that chute out. And now I go all these wonderful feed yards. When I was in Mexico last week, every place had a silencer hydraulic chute. And I look at how far our facilities have come. A lot of them had a tub or a bud box in behind. I look at how far our design and our facilities have come and how much better chance we have of being safe, keeping the animals safe, and having them flow and work through these facilities, plus want to come back and do it again the next time. So our facilities have made all the changes in the world. It's such a great thing that we're going through right now with the facilities. Now, when we have the knowledge of how to work better in the facilities, we're on our way. Sure.
Just as we continue on this facilities piece, how long do you think a cow's memory is?
I don't know. I think I think an animal, I don't know so much about cows, but I know horses. I think horses have photographic memories from a lot of horses I've ridden or things I've done. And I think they have everything in their mind that's ever happened is in their head. I've got a couple examples of that. One time I was working for Sieben, and I got way up in these mountains, and a big, strong fog came in. And I was on this ridge, and if I went one way, it's about 7 miles back to the ranch. And if I went the other way, it's about a mile back to my trailer. and I couldn't see. It was just fogged up so bad I couldn't hardly see the end of my nose. So I put my hand in front of my face, and I let my horse go, and in about 10 minutes I was at the trailer. He knew exactly where he was. I was doing a clinic in Wisconsin one time, and some people were coming back. They'd had this colt there. The people that were doing the clinic had started this colt 4 years previous, and he had a stall there. They pulled in. These people pulled in. They were going to come to the clinic. They pulled in. As they were unloading the horse, he ran backwards, got away from him, ran backwards, and ran immediately to the stall that he'd been kept in 4 years previous.
Wow.
Now, how in the world would he have known that he was there? He just roared out of that trailer and ran right to his stall. So I think animals have an incredible memory that we don't even understand.
Sure. Yep. I've definitely heard that before, and maybe it was you that I heard talk about it, that leading a horse into the same pen with things in a different place can sometimes upset them.
Yeah, I've seen that quite a bit. Yeah, that's exactly. They really noticing. And you want to think, and cows is like those buck and bull cows. If you change one thing in a pen, they are looking at it and they don't know if they want to go through there or not. So
sure.
Animals are very observant.
Yep. Yeah, we just had an experience here at our place where we went through, and Dad had built a bud box, and but it was a rail bud box, and they could look out all the way around that. And we went through and put some rubber belting up on the inside of that bud box, and I can't tell you how much of a difference that made in the way they went through there, just not being able to see a way out, and the only way out was up the chute or up the load and chute or whatever it was. And is that part of what we're talking about when we talk about facility design? You bet. Yeah, lights, all those things. The thing I think that we really need to think about, we've kind of focused on a lot of different things, but I think the thing we really need to focus on when we're building facilities is the facilities have to allow us to put the pressure on at the right place at the right time. So many times, and that's the big advantage of the bud box, so many times you're at the back of the cattle. You're 10 animals away from where you need to put the pressure on that one. And so our facilities sometimes create where we have to stress the cattle right next to us a lot to try to get the animals 10 cattle or 20 cattle away from us. So that's where I think the stockmanship and the facilities can work together. If you can't get to that front animal, you got to stop, go around, get out of the corral, go around and get to the animal that you need to pressure. And that's the big mistake. I think in our society, we have learned if you're stuck, just mash on the gas more and you'll get yourself out, whether it works or not. And I think we do that sometimes with our animals. And that is why they really get a lot of stress that's not necessary on them. And with that memory that we're talking about, they never want to come back from that situation again. And that's why they start balking before they even, that's why I see a lot of wing fences going up in corrals. It starts out where the cattle go in and then they get too much pressure and they're there. So then they say, I'm not going in there more. Then we end up building a wing fence. So then we can get them and jam enough pressure on, and then they don't even want to go in the pasture next time. Sure. So we got to be real careful of that. Well, we're talking with Curt Pate here today about stockmanship, and we're going to come back after a quick break. We're going to thank our sponsors. We're going to come back, and I got a few more questions to ask him. So we'll be right back after this quick break. This episode has been brought to you in part by Kamak Ranch Supply. Check out their website at kamakranchsupply.com. All right, we're back with Curt Pate talking about stockmanship today. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today. We've been talking about the facility design, and you've mentioned that kind of man and machine have to work together here as far as the stockman and his facility. What are some principles when we're working up a chute as far as stockmanship is concerned? I think numbers of cattle that you take is really, really important. And that's something I see everywhere you go. People take too many numbers. And I know I weaned a lot of calves in Canada this year. I've worked a lot up in Canada, and so when they have all those balling calves come into those feed yards, they're processing a lot of calves. So I got to help a lot of those a lot of different facilities. You know, those guys they'll stack 20, 30 calves in a tub, and they'll feed themselves through there. And our rule is never to store cattle in the tub. And I learned a little bit of a lesson, but they would just work, and those calves, being curious, they've never been through there, they'll flow through there pretty easy. And then they just got to go back and pick a few up, and that they can use a lot less people. But once animals start getting to where they understand that pressure coming back, then the human has to apply. And I think this is the whole principle of stockmanship.
I kind of forget where we're going with this, but that's all right. I always do that. I'll just go where I want. How about that?
That sounds great.
So I think, and that's what you got to do with cattle handling. You just got to go where you need to put the pressure on. So to me, if I'm looking to put cattle up a tub or a bud box or in a chute or on the truck, that truck or that whatever's in front of them is going to put a certain amount of pressure back. So say loading onto a semi, it puts 100 pounds of pressure back on those calves. I've got to be able to put at least 101 or 105, 110 pounds of pressure on that animal to get him to go over that pressure into the truck. If I can't do that, then I'm going to lose. But if you put 140 pounds of pressure on, that's when we break those animals over into that survival mode where they really get afraid and they can't think and they just react. And then the whole trip there, they're going to be stressed and they're going to be bothered thinking that human's on the other side of that door when they go out. So this is where kind of understanding proper pressure is so important. So with our facilities and our stockmanship combined, and the training, see, and this is the thing that I think people forget about with cattle. We all think about training our horses and our dogs. Always. Most people just would never do any. You'd never go to the barrel racing at the local county fair or whatever without having your horse know how to run around a pattern. But we'll try to load our cattle in the truck with not ever even thinking about teaching them how to load on a truck or go through a chute or go through a corral or sort. And I think one of the real things we need to train our cattle in the West, like if I go to Belle Fourche Livestock or St. Ange or to Miles City, Montana, when I go in those auction markets, they tell me that the biggest trouble they have with range cattle is the cattle don't know how to stop. And when they're trying to sort or do things, it's like trying to sort a bunch of bucket. If you watch Hank Franzen at the Belle Fourche at the rodeo, Hank Franzen's horses know how to handle. They stop, he can back up a few steps, they stop and wait, and then he can sort horses. You go to some of the other guys that don't think about stockmanship, you can't stop those horses. When one go, they all go. And that's kind of how sheep handle. So we've got to teach our cattle to stop and wait and think for us and either come by us or turn back. That makes sorting so much easier, so much less stressful, and so much more effective if you can do that. So those are kind of training things that I think you teach animals to go through pressure and then how to stop. Now, in the East, when I go back east, those cattle, the farmer cattle, they don't know how to go. And so that's almost as big of a challenge. When they come to a spot that the pressure is too much, they just stop and you can't put enough pressure on to make them go. So there should be a little bit of a balance, I think, just like a nice horse. If you got a real nice horse, he goes, he stops, he turns, he does all the things you need him to do to get what you want to get done. And our cattle, we should think of them the same way.
Sure. Well, you're speaking my language. You're right up my alley here on the Working Cows podcast. That's where the title came from, is that we want to put cows to work for us. We don't always want to have to be the one working for them. We want to put them to work for us. We want them to be trained so that we can work them safely and quietly and effectively and efficiently as possible. So I appreciate that perspective that you have shared with us thus far. I got a couple of other questions. Is there anything we can do to retrain wild cows?
Yes, spoiled cows. Let's say that.
Okay.
Because,
sure.
Cattle that want to leave the bunch. That's kind of what we're talking here. If you're trying to gather a bunch of cattle and they split and run off. Or
cows that have been handled, have had bad experiences in the past, as far as been handled improperly.
Yeah, sometimes with those kind of animals, you got to put enough pressure on them to make them change their mind. And something, it's kind of like, I went for a while where I didn't wear spurs when I was riding my horses. And I don't wear them very much anyway. And the reason I did that is because I figured with spurs, if I didn't have spurs on, I'd have to really get my horse in balance right before he'd really make the move the way I wanted to. And it really taught me how to balance my horse out and then ask him to make the move. But so when my kids were little and we were riding lots of horses for the public, when they'd see me get off a horse and go put my spurs on, they headed out. They left because they knew there was going to be some fur flying and I was going to be spurring on them. And I rode bareback horses for quite a while, and I know how to turn my toe out and stick it in one. And that might seem wrong or kind of cruel, but those horses had learned how to run through pressure, how to push through the humans so much that they needed to have a lot of pressure before they started looking for a way out. And right or wrong, I don't know, but you got to make the change. The best thing would have been to never have that horse get in that spot in the first place. But somebody didn't know how to create the proper pressure, so they created a monster. Same thing with our cattle. We got to learn how to. There's a little rule here that would be very helpful to keep those kind of cattle from coming. When you put pressure on an animal, should be a promise to any animal, humans too. When you put pressure on an animal, they should be able to take the pressure off themselves. And when they take the pressure off themselves, you don't apply more pressure. You have a release of pressure. They learn how to get away from that pressure and release from the pressure. But if you put pressure on an animal and he can't figure out how to take that pressure off, the human has to be smart enough to step back, take the pressure off himself, reapply the pressure where the animal can understand it, or the child or whoever we're talking about can understand the pressure, then let them take that pressure off. What happens with those cattle that have bad habits is I think we put pressure on, and when they don't do what we want, we put more pressure on. And pretty soon they can't take that pressure and they jump the fence or run over or kick you. So that's the first place to stop that. But if it's already gone too far, like an animal when you're trying to curl and they run off and quit you, I'll just kind of come in. If you got time, I'll just come in and track those things. I'll try to kind of hide behind that cow's tail and I'll just follow her around. Anytime she turns back towards the bunch, I'll back off. If she goes away from the bunch, you go to her, and pretty soon, if you've got the time in the country, you'll get that old bag where she wants to be in the middle of that herd and never come out again. And she'll learn that's a good place to be. And that's for me, that's a great opportunity for me to learn. If I'm riding a young horse or something, that's a great job for my young horse, and you're getting a cow better.
Sure. Yeah, my mom was a first grade teacher for most of her career, and I don't know how many times I saw her write on a note to a parent, catch them doing what you want them to do and reward them for doing it.
Wow.
And that's kind of what you're talking about with these cows.
That's exactly.
So
exactly.
Very helpful, very practical advice. And I've got, this conversation has led to 100 other questions. I'd love to have another opportunity to sit down with you and ask you some more sometime. I do have a couple more that I came here armed with. And one of them is there a good place to go and find an effective gate latch design in a cattle working facility, or is there something that you would recommend that we can maybe copy?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's the great thing about my job is all these different things I get to see, and I've seen a lot of great gate latches at 101 Livestock in California. The Jim Warren, he had developed a system where he could open all these gates with a horseback with they're kind of piston latches, but he had them horse rope friendly. So an old boy I was in Montana with, he had an extra long horseback latch. So I don't know. The old Powder River latch. You remember how those things in our country, when it freezes, it's hard to get those buggers to work. Freeford everybody has their own latches, but something that works a horseback or a foot is nice, what I always look for, and something you can open with one hand when you have another hand occupied.
Yep.
I think it's important, too, with cattle to have a double latch system where it's on the bottom and the top, so you don't have cattle pushing through gates. That's what I think. I see some of these new gate manufacturers, they got these slam latches, but I also see that after a little while, their slam latches are holding, but the bottom of the gate's all bent up.
Yeah. Yep. I think that one thing that we found is that cows not being able to see a way out, and we even wrapped our gates with tarps, and we've got a little rubber drag on the bottom of those gates so that they can't see under them.
You bet.
How much of your facility, any place where you're putting pressure on cows, do you want to have that kind of a blocked vision for them, except for the gate that you're trying to push them into, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's all right. I'll tell you something, and I'm not a facilities guy. We have the bucking bulls and the cows and everything, and we just use prefer panels. And I'll use a few tarps or something, but not much. But I was we were hauling some bulls across the Las Vegas or something. We stayed at a sale barn in the desert, and it was all wood facilities. And he said, I was talking to the guy that owned it, and he said, I'd like to put in a nice new panel system. But he says these desert cattle, they need to have wood and they need to have it horizontal or vertical. He says if you don't have it vertical, they can't see it and they'll hit fences if they're desert cattle that haven't been in the corrals much. And I think that's pretty interesting. A lot of those Southwest corrals are all standing up, and a lot of our old corrals in our country were, the wood was standing up and down. And now we have all these vertical deals, and I don't think cattle can see them as well from what I hear from the old timers. And that brings me to another point. I hear all this science, and we have great science right now, but really what science does is backs up what my grandfather and your grandfather knew in the first place without the science.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I've been in a lot of places that were built a long time ago, and they've got those vertical panels that I think, that, like you said, the cows do see a little bit better. So maybe a simple design principle right there is you might not have to make it all block vision, but you can make it vertical so they see it a little easier. That's good.
Yep.
Appreciate that.
we might have to come up with the block vision because of we don't have the vertical. It's more horizontal now. So maybe we have to compensate for that.
Yeah, everywhere we blocked their vision was a horizontal panel.
Yeah, I think that's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting for sure. Well, I don't want to keep you any longer than I said I would, but I would like to just give you an opportunity to kind of share where people can catch up with you and see what you're doing. And then I'd also like to ask you if you could give some recommendations on where people can go to learn effective stockmanship and facility design techniques.
Yeah, I have a website. I call the internet the modern day smoke signal, and so I have a website, Curt Pate Stockmanship, and I write what I call a scoop loop. I don't like to blog, so I call it a scoop loop. But I write once in a while. I write about some stuff. And my wife, I don't believe I've never been on Facebook, so my wife puts it on Facebook for me. So that's where people can find stuff. Sure. I work for the NCBA a lot. And I do what they call the Stockmanship and Stewardship Tour. And Ron Gill and I, we do a lot of those events. And those are a real good, positive thing. I don't care what, I'm not into the politics of the NCBA, but I am into the education. So I know a lot of your listeners in this world, they have different opinions on different things, but education is always a good thing. I don't care where you're at. So I like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'm doing my best to not step in that hornet's nest. So
yeah, me too. And I don't care. It doesn't matter to me one way or the other. Yep. I just want people to get paid fair price for their animals and live this lifestyle like we're doing.
Yep.
Real proud. So very
good.
There's lots of great people doing stockmanship out here, and I think so many, like where you get where there's a lot of really good cowboys. They kind of sometimes think this is beneath them a little bit. And I really hope that you can not think that way. This, to me, the cowboy trade, the cowboy tradition is such an important thing of our past, of our future and everything. And it's part of our heritage. And I really know everywhere I go, there's real good stockmen, good cowboys. There's a certain, 10% that are excellent. And then you have a lot that are pretty good. And then you have some that shouldn't be cowboy and they should be on a tractor somewhere. And that's just the way I see it. But to me, I really want to have skills. I want to be able to rope. I want to be able to ride a horse. And if I have to get after an animal and get it roped and tied down, I want to be able to have that skill. But I'd rather try everything else I could before I ever got to that spot. I was with one of the people I was with in Mexico last week. His boy was a black belt. And I say cowboys should be black belts in cowboy, where you have all these skills. You could do anything you want, but you would try never to use them. And that's one of the things that black belts learn is how to restrain from using all the things that they can use to kill somebody. So I think cowboys the same way. So, cowboys, we should really work at this and really try to get good at the stockmanship, but keep our roping skill, keep our horse skills, keep our people skills top notch, because this world needs us. And I get kind of tired of the people that kind of criticize all cowboys. So that's my little soapbox stand.
Thank you again for your time. And I looked over the schedule there for the NCBA trade show and some of the things that you guys have going on. And there's some really interesting nuggets. I'd love to have you on again and talk about maybe some low stress family handling principles as well. Maybe we could avoid having to wear that T-shirt I saw on the internet the other day. I'm sorry for what I said while I was working cows.
Exactly. Yes. Okay. So that brings me to one more point. Do we have time?
Yeah, we got time.
Okay. So to me, there's only one other time people act like they do when they're working cattle. And that's when I see somebody coaching football or basketball. They'll do things there to young kids that you'd never do in any other situation just to win a game. And I see the same thing when we start working cattle. I see the same behavior with people, to their wives, to their kids, and something takes over us, and we've got to learn how to control that emotion.
Yeah, very good insight there. And I like I said, love to get you back on and talk about that again. Links to all of what we talked about will be in the show notes page on workingcows.net. We'll have a link to Curt's website and the Facebook page and the Scoop Loop and all those different things. We'll get you guys in touch with Curt, and you can see where he's going to be next, and maybe see where you can catch up with him and get in a little bit more of this continuing education that I think is so important in the agricultural industry.
So, yeah, I think it's really nice what you're doing here, Clay. Keep it up. And being your other work, I'll leave you with one last thought, if that's all right. And here's something that I think is real important for people. This is something I think just is a good thing to leave with. And I ask this in a lot of places I go. And the question is, would Jesus wear spurs?
Very good.
So there you go.
Yep.
That's my last thought.
Thank you. I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for joining me today.
See you.
See ya. This episode has been brought to you in part by ChrisWilliamsAudio.com. If you're a musician, podcaster, or filmmaker, don't settle for audio that's less than professional. Head on over to ChrisWilliamsAudio.com for all your podcasting, music production, and film audio needs. As I've thought about Curt's question, I have come up with this answer. Jesus would apply appropriate pressure. We see Jesus applying appropriate pressure throughout his ministry. He always responds to the person he is dealing with in exactly the way they need to be responded to. And I think, obviously, as Curt is, alluding to, we can learn a lot from his ministry philosophy as we deal with cows, and we can learn to apply appropriate pressure, apply the pressure that cow needs at that time in that situation. Along with that, we can also learn some low-stress family handling practices, but I think that is a conversation for another time with Curt Pate. If you want to keep up with Curt, you can check out the show notes page at workingcows.net/11, and that will have links to all of the ways that you can get in touch with Curt. Next week, we've got Dave Pratt from Ranching for Profit. I'm really excited about that conversation, so we will see you next Monday.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.